Hi, I'm Nick Student, CEO of Oliver Wyman. I'm here in Oliver Wyman, London, with Sherry Madera, the CEO of CDP. Sherry, thank you very much indeed for joining me here.
Nick, thanks so much for having us, and thanks so much to Oliver Wyman for being a great partner of CDP.
Our pleasure. It's an important partnership for us. Last time we were together, we were in Davos, slightly different surroundings. I think we were sort of on the hoof, talking about our latest work together, which actually got great play in Davos, and I think you really presented beautifully in the Congress Center. What's happened since then?
Well, we are in a changed world. When we were together in Davos and we launched our first annual corporate health check, that was before there was an administration change in the US.
Gosh,
if we remember
wasn't
back.
it?
Yep, absolutely.
Time flies.
Indeed. It was also snowing outside, and the footwear was not quite as fun as it is today, much more practical. And I think that everybody was wondering what was going to happen next. So I think that landing our report at that time was a really good point to say, actually, corporates have agency when we're thinking about what is a sustainable business and what is a sustainable future. So I think that has actually drawn a lot more interest questions over the course of the last 6 months for CDP, hopefully also for your clients at Oliver Wyman, saying, all right, well, this data is indicating that it's grim reading when you talk about the planetary boundaries and how it is that the world is breaching them, but corporates have a way of actually starting to think about how it is that they can do better, do differently, and actually secure an economic future for everyone.
Yeah, and certainly in my conversations with CEOs and in our work, I've not seen any diminishing focus, frankly, on the need to be responsible to society for the carbon and increasingly the nature impacts that corporations are having. I think people are treading carefully. I think it is vital, and we've both said this over time, that the transition is done in a sensible fashion. We call it a commercially sensible fashion to get the balance right. I think one of the stats that the Oliver Wyman team pulled out working with your team was, I think this is a CDP stat. Over the last decade, your kind of A-rated companies have a 6% higher stock market return than the indices. So, you can navigate a commercially sensible transition. But when it comes to disclosure, when it comes to setting targets, when it comes to holding your own management to account and all those various aspects, the corporate health check, certainly my conversations, clients finding it very helpful.
Absolutely, and I think it's also grounding corporates in what are some of the levers that together we really surface to say, what are the consistent things that corporates are doing in order to be leaders in terms of climate and sustainability? And those were really clear. Thinking about linking executive pay to those sustainability targets, having an internal carbon price, and sometimes that's a little controversial, but certainly it's something for us to think about how it is that corporates play a role there. Also thinking about how it is that corporates engage not just with themselves, but with their whole supply chain, and thinking about how that value chain is really impacting. And finally, thinking about transition plans instead of just targets. And I think that is something that's really consistent. I'm hearing a lot here this week in London and consistently over the last 6 months. Targets simply are not enough. Of course, you have to have a baseline and you have to have a target. That's part of how you actually measure and manage. However, how you're getting from point A to point B is deeply important to investors, to buyers, to procurement offices, to talent, to your own business. So all of these things actually sing together.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. Balance, I think, is a very important word. And it was interesting looking in, given we are here for London Climate Week, looking at the data of the corporate health check for UK companies versus the EU versus the rest of the world. And perhaps unsurprisingly, given the position of the UK government over the years, UK corporates actually come out very well across, I think, each of the main families of categories of the health check. Whether it be disclosure, whether it be linking executive remuneration to progress, which I think is a decent start. I think there's still a lot more to do. I think we only see something like 15% of companies really being on that kind of top category across the board. What are you expecting to be talking about this week for Climate Week?
You're right. Let's take a moment and give the UK the credit it's due, since we're sitting here in this jurisdiction. We talked about targets and transition plans, and in terms of targets, 33% of the world's companies have set targets now, which is encouraging. But that's in comparison to the EU being ahead of that, so about 56% have set targets. And here in the UK, it's 62% of companies that set targets. And then, of course, it's the next question: so what? Are they on track? Are they on target in terms of being able to hit those targets? And globally, 35%, according to the data, are on track to hit their own targets, which is, encouraging, and yet, there's lots of room to maneuver. Then we start looking at the other two jurisdictions. Europe is about 46%, and the UK comes in at 50%. So they're, a clear 15% ahead of the pack when it comes to thinking about how it is that they're performing against their own targets. So that's encouraging. It's a good place to be.
Glass literally half full.
Literally half full. But you're right, actually, when you start thinking about, well, what contributes to that? What makes the UK that 50% versus the global 35%? And we have to have those discussions about thinking about how policy has been either clear or directional. How is government and regulation come into play earlier, and then we're seeing and reaping the rewards for all of that. And of course, that is, still a time of uncertainty and turbulence. But even this week, we're seeing the consultation for the UK industrial policy and continuing to consider how green, sustainable business is going to drive the future, I think is very encouraging.
Yeah, and I think certainly speaking from the UK perspective, it hasn't been non-controversial for the last couple of years about how fast should the government push, what does that mean for industry. But at the same time, the opportunities of investment in green technology in the UK is aiming to be a leader. I think that's going to be part of the industrial strategy and has been for a little while. What advice do you have? What conversations are you having around getting that balance right?
I think that you cannot separate out any longer the discussion about sustainability and net zero targets. It has to be a whole of economy approach. So thinking about sort of how is it that we can give the confidence to all of the players that are making decisions across the economy, be they governments, regulators, corporates, cities, states, regions. Here in the UK, over 96% of the cities and states report into CDP. So they're really measuring and managing. All of them have targets, and most of them have transition plans. Well, that's actually only so much in their own gift to be able to achieve when we're talking about place-based targets. It has to be about how that economy shows up in that region. So having that collaborative understanding of what is the data saying, how is it you can have that discussion so that you're retaining jobs and growth and retaining profitability while also protecting the future in terms of inputs for those businesses, the planet, and obviously the societal benefits that come from living here and doing good work.
Yeah, that local government reporting was new news to me as I was sort of reading up in advance of this discussion, and that's good news. So a question. I was over the weekend. I was outside London, actually near my parents' house, and my 16-year-old in the back of the car said, "Dad, there's a sticker on that house that says no to net zero. How can that be?" And I was trying to explain to him some of the balances that we've been talking about here. What would you say to that householder?
Well, I would say, how are they understanding and defining net zero? I think this is one of the real tripwires in thinking about how we build a sustainable economy going forward. What is that phrase net zero? It's been around for a long while, but is it zero? Or is it net zero? And who is above and who is below that line? It's very confusing to the man, woman, child on the street, but it's also confusing to business leaders as well. So I think that it's about understanding how we can actually make sure that the nomenclature and the discussion is changing. And right now, we're seeing that across the board at CDP. So when we talk about sustainability, climate, environment, actually, what we're really trying to embed that in is how is it that you can create opportunities? Where are your risks? What is the real physical risks that are coming down to your business, to your environment, to your family? And if we can start making sure that we're understanding that, then actually this nomenclature about no net zero, that actually becomes, I understand why we're doing this. How is it that each player in the economy can make good choices on good data? And that, I think, is where we should focus, as opposed to sort of playing some of the games of the past, using words that perhaps are less resonant.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I mean, I think that policymakers making plans that they hoped would be beyond the sort of measurable feelings of individuals, 5-10 years ago, but we're now well within the zone where action has to be taken. I mean, as you said, in the UK, 50% of companies on target, but the glass half empty is huge amounts of work still to do. And when we extend into the other aspects of nature, even fewer, I think, who are thinking hard about things like water, like biodiversity, which ultimately are intrinsically linked to climate. So yeah, probably still quite a lot more to do.
It is, but I think that if we can ground this in what businesses and economies and humans are talking about, then I think we have a bigger and better chance to start thinking about how it is that we can all act productively. I'll give you an example. You really can't avoid talking about AI these days. And that's exciting. Some people find it scary. It's moving quite quickly, et cetera. But what is an absolute certainty is that we need more data centers. And we need more capacity in order to be able to drive AI. And so that's coming very fast and furious. Is it on a collision course with climate? Because actually, if you're talking about more data centers, you need more power. Where's that power coming from? How is it that we're going to be able to meet those needs? We all talk about renewables, and it's encouraging that in renewables, price is coming down and its uptake is going up. Is it fast enough? And then it layers on, I know, a topic very close to your heart and mine as well, which is how is it that plays into nature? And with data centers, water is a absolutely critical input to making it go. It's a cooling factor. There's the ability to make it a closed system, but there are even factors to consider there. And there are places in the world that are now saying no more data centers because we don't have the power capacity and we don't have the water capacity. And that's very interesting because water then doesn't become an ethereal, natural, we should protect nature. It becomes an economic input. And that is actually a conversation I think we should be leaning into. Because there's nothing woke about that. That is all about how is it that we do drive jobs, growth, thinking about a better, profitable, more sustainable future. And if AI is going to be part of it, which, I believe that, we certainly need to embrace that. It's moving really quickly and there's a lot of great things that can come from it. But we need to make sure that collision course isn't happening and that we think about that.
I agree with that totally. I mean, if you see how that debate has evolved, the projection of energy usage and electricity usage for data centers was obviously not factored. An AI world was not factored into projections that were made barely a few years ago. And so when that trend started to happen, I think a lot of the initial reaction was, well, this is net negative for the climate. This is going to be terrible. But actually, the flow of serious, high investing, globally responsible corporations into that space, I think if anything, creates the opportunity to take a step forward on innovation, which would not have occurred otherwise. And again, in our interactions, we're seeing many of those players not blowing with the slightly more political winds of whether something is in favor or not, but actually they are charting out their responsibility over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and they're realizing that they have to invest in whether it's sequestration or whatever technology advances it is that are going to help them manage the lifetime emissions of their data centers, just as one example. So we're going into Climate Week. It's a chance to take stock, as it seems to be every few months in Climate Weeks through the year. What are you hoping for this week and then over the rest of this next couple of years when it comes to our progress on the carbon journey?
Well, and I do want to make it the carbon and nature journey. So, at CDP, we've been using the phrase Earth positive, pulling together both climate and nature because they're inextricably linked. And I think that as we're thinking about how it is we protect nature, we can draw from some of the benefits of understanding how we've been working on climate and probably some of the things that we didn't do so well with climate. So let's pull that together so that that lands really well. London Climate Action Week is right in the middle of two COPs. So we're coming from Azerbaijan and going to Belém in Brazil. And I think it's a really good timing for the world to be able to gather in a very international city. I live here, you live here, that, there's always sort of those international angles happening. And I think I see that even just in the last couple of days, that it's international delegations that are coming and sharing what it is that climate and nature protection means for their region, for their economies, for their part of the ecosystem. So I think that that's really encouraging. I do think it's going to be a hard trip to Belém. There is a lot of expectation. I felt that COP29, I know we were both there and making sure that we were moving things forward, but it was only a fraction of what I think that Brazil is going to be in terms of footprint and ambition and announcements. So there's a lot of work to do between now and then. And my biggest concern is that actually often we talk in an echo chamber. We're speaking to others that, kind of reinforce, yes, we know that nature makes a big difference. We know that water is an economic input. We know that climate is not on track for 1.5 degree warming. However, there's a whole group of those that are emitters out there that are looking at growth, looking at how it is that they build their prosperity, that may not be factoring in perhaps, making better and different decisions than that corporations have made in the past. And I'd really hope that between now and Belém, we crowd more of that in so that we can see some significant change.
Excellent. Any last thoughts for our viewers before we pile out to Climate Action Week?
I think it's just that this is a business imperative. I'm speaking to you as, the leader of Oliver Wyman. You know this because you speak to your clients every day. We know this as CDP because 2/3 of the world's market capitalization report to us, and they are not backing off on their targets. In fact, they're leaning in and thinking, how is it that actually they can measure more so that they can manage more? Not because necessarily they want to primarily save the planet, but they want to make sure that they have a profitable business that actually is sustainable, not just this year, but in 5 years and 10 years. And what's happening in terms of climate change, in terms of nature loss, is impacting their business. And that is really solid business thinking, and that I think is what we need to keep talking about.
Amen. I think those are excellent words to finish on. That's certainly what we see both in our client base and within Oliver Wyman and Marsh McLennan's internal operations. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you. Let's do this in Belém.
Yeah.